Salvete, it is I, your Magister, and the cow. So, today what we're going to be talking about is our second part of the politics, philosophy, religion, etc., that we had started before. Now, last time was a little bit of a longer look at what we got from Greece, Rome, and the Vikings in terms of like American legal theory and some political stuff. Well, today we're going to look a little bit more about religion and philosophy. So, and this is just going to be some basic, very simple, easy stuff here. So, there's a really big key difference here. The Greeks, myth was not only their religion, the stories of their gods and goddesses, which they took as being really accounts of the gods and goddesses. It served as entertainment as well. It was literature for them. It was also science. It explained why things were the way they were. It also was historical. For the Greeks, their myths encapsulated real history. Now, a great example of this is the Trojan War, which there is still an ongoing raging debate about whether the war really existed, etc. And, you know, the thing is, for the longest time, people didn't believe the city of Troy existed, and then they dug it up in the late 19th century. So there actually is a lot of historical context to the Greek myths. They may not necessarily be real in the sense that we think of history, but they still use them to keep track of history. Now, this is a big difference from the Romans. The Romans didn't really have myths in the same way. Romans got their pantheon, that's their gods and goddesses, from the Etruscans. And what they inherited from the Etruscans were literally the gods and goddesses. They had descriptions of maybe what they were the god and goddess of, but they didn't have any stories about them. They had lots of rituals, though. A ritual is a way of doing something. And the Romans were really big on rules and about following very specific formulas and procedures, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just different. One of the reasons is an aside that in modern times you have the Roman Catholic Church. The distinction Roman, while some people argue it's because Latin is the language of the Western Church, that's not where it comes from. The word Roman really indicates that it's an organized ritualistic religion that follows a specific series of rules and rites in terms of its practices. Now, going on from this, with what I had just mentioned, the Romans did not have stories or reasons behind their gods and goddesses. And granted, this is an example, and it's not real, so the trolls who are out there seeking to like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you brought this up, just relax and chill out. So if you were to step in your little blue box time machine, sort of like, oh, I'm leaning over here, sort of like this lovely thing right here, and you were to fly back to ancient Rome and get out and let's just suppose that it was a Thursday, Dies Iovis, which it is today, and you saw somebody wearing a striped blue toga, and you were to walk up to them because the blue box time machine gives you the ability to translate languages, and say, hi, why are you wearing a blue striped toga? Their response might be something, and remember, this is just an example. Well, it's because it's Thursday. Okay, but why do you wear that on Thursday? Well, because on Friday we wear yellow, and on Wednesday we wear red. Yeah, but why do you wear red on Wednesday? Because Thursday is blue striped toga day, and Friday is yellow day. Okay, but why is Thursday blue striped toga day? Well, I already told you, because Wednesday's red day and Friday's yellow day. And if you kept asking questions, it would eventually assume that you're just a Greek and hit you. Now, again, it's just an example, but this is sort of the Roman mindset. We don't have reasons, but we have lots of rules. The stories that the Romans did have, or Roman myths, as you want to call them, were mainly about the city of Rome and its people. Look at the myth of Romulus and Remus, for example. The only mention you have of gods and goddesses is the fact that their father was Mars, and that they were dumped in the river Tiber, or Tiber technically, and that the river god looked out for them. There's no other aspect in there. Unlike Greek myths, the Roman stories focus more on real people or on real events about the city of Rome because they were designed to make the city of Rome look better. Now, Greece and Rome together. And as something you guys probably already know, Greek and Roman gods are very similar. Now, this probably has a lot to do with the fact that they're both Mediterranean countries. So even though there's a distance of hundreds, if not thousands of miles, or 1,000 miles or so between them, They are both on the Mediterranean Sea and have very similar lifestyles and probably very similar economies in some way and very similar outlooks on things. So Etruscan gods and goddesses were very similar to Greek gods and goddesses. In fact, there's a lot of evidence, anthropological evidence, that says that there's probably some commonality between the peoples, and this is why the way they were. The Romans took Greek myths and simply adapted them to fit their rituals. Rome's gods, who they called the Dei Consentes, even lived on Mount Olympus, which is in Greece. The Romans changed their beliefs to fit the Greek myths, and they adapted Greek myths into their ritual systems. Roman myths were simply retellings of Greek stories. That's supposed to be a story. That was a typo there. Ew. Now, the Roman belief system basically boiled down to this. Rome was better than everybody else. The Romans adopted Greek ideas. Now, you need to remember and keep this in mind. We brought this up in class. The Romans really hated the Greeks. They were very jealous of them. But they looked at things through a Greek perspective. Non-Romans were regarded as barbarians, which comes from a Greek word that literally means foreigner. It didn't matter how technologically civilized you were or how much culture you had. If you weren't Roman, you were a barbarian. So it's not like we're talking about a group of people living in huts or, wandering the plains necessarily. They could be well-organized societies. If they simply weren't Roman, they were barbarians. Educated and wealthy Romans spoke Greek, wore Greek clothing style, embraced Greek customs. Greek theater and music were what the Romans had until they came up with their own. But they adapted Greek pieces to fit Roman needs. Even music-wise, the Greeks were the ones, Pythagoras was the one who composed the octave system of music with the notes, and the Romans, nobody wrote stuff down, but the Romans learned Greek music and then passed it on. Eventually, the Romans even abandoned Rome. In the 4th century AD, the Romans decided, for a lot of different reasons, to build a brand new city that they called Nova Roma, or its more common name was Constantinople, the city of Constantine, which was built in the Greek regions of what we now call Turkey. And for all intents and purposes, it became a Greek empire. The Byzantines, who are the successors of the Roman Empire, were even called the Greek Romans, or the Greek Roman Empire, because they had virtually abandoned everything else that was what had made them Romans. Latin became the language of the common people and the language of business. Greek was the language of the educated, the elite, and the wealthy. So in the end, the Romans became what they hated. Rome was able to do all that it was, in part because of what they did with the Greeks. And I don't mean necessarily just like taking the Greek and, adapting their stories. The Romans easily adapted other cultures into themselves. They accepted other religions and attempted to fit them in them. So when the Romans met the Egyptians, they simply tried to line up Egyptian gods and goddesses with their own. Now, this became very problematic later, but at least early on, they would find commonality there. Now, we'll talk a little bit later in our 3rd lesson about the Vikings and about the problems that Germanic religions had for the Romans. But for the most part, this acceptance and absorption of the other religions is part of what made them successful. Finally, there were only 3 things you had to do to keep the Romans happy. Obey the Roman laws, pay your taxes, and don't cause trouble. These are the formulas that Rome used to successfully rule the known world. Okay, wale.